The call that would change everything began with a wrong number, and a billionaire who answered out of boredom. Damian Ward was not supposed to pick up. His assistant usually filtered every call that reached his private line, but tonight, the phone buzzed in his jacket pocket while he sat alone in his car, parked outside a hotel gala he couldn't bring himself to attend. He was halfway through deleting another unread message when a child's voice came through the receiver, trembling and small. "Please help. My mom's not waking up." For a moment, he thought it was a prank. He almost hung up, but something in the voice, the fear laced with hope, stopped him. "Where are you?" he asked, his tone sharper than he meant. The girl sniffled. "Our house, above Jimmy's Tools, the red door that sticks." "City?" "Boston." He frowned, engine already roaring to life. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she said. "I was trying to call my uncle, but—" The line crackled, then went dead. Damian didn't hesitate. 15 minutes later, a black SUV cut through the rain-slick streets of East Boston, its tires hissing against the pavement. The neighborhood looked like it hadn't seen money or mercy in decades. Peeling paint, dark windows, the smell of fried oil and cold metal. When he pulled up to a narrow building with a flickering sign for Jimmy's Tools, he killed the engine and stepped out into the drizzle. The red door was exactly where she'd said it would be. It resisted his first knock, so he pushed harder, the warped frame finally giving way. Inside, the apartment was dim. A little girl sat on the floor beside a woman sprawled across the tile, her small hands clutching a phone and a stuffed rabbit. Tears streaked her cheeks. "Are you Sophie?" Damian asked softly. She nodded, eyes wide. "You came." He knelt beside the unconscious woman, checking for a pulse. Faint but steady. He'd been trained once, years ago, when his foundation demanded field readiness for emergency visits abroad. He hadn't used that knowledge since. "She's breathing," he murmured. "She just needs help." "Is my mom gonna die?" "No," he said firmly. "She's just very tired." He pulled out his own phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher took his report with the efficiency of someone who didn't care who he was. When he hung up, Sophie was still staring at him. "You're not my uncle," she said. "No," he admitted. "You called the wrong number." Her lip quivered. "You came anyway." He wasn't sure what to say to that. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. They worked quickly, checking vitals, administering fluids. Damian stayed out of their way but didn't leave. When they loaded Elena Ruiz, he caught her name from a clipboard, onto a stretcher. Sophie reached for his hand. "Can I go with her?" she asked one of the medics. "You can ride in the front," the woman said kindly. Sophie turned to Damian, squeezing his fingers. "You'll come too?" He hesitated. He had meetings in the morning, a board presentation waiting, a dozen obligations that had never seemed optional until now. But looking into her eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "I'll be right behind you," he said. At Boston General, the fluorescent lights made everything too white, too sharp. Elena was taken into observation while Sophie and Damian sat side by side in the waiting area. The girl was half asleep, head resting against his arm. "Do you have anyone to call?" he asked quietly. "My uncle's working in another city," she murmured. "Mom says it's just us until he gets back." "Your mom's strong," Damian said. "She's going to be okay." Sophie nodded, eyes fluttering shut. "You sound like her." He smiled faintly, though the words unsettled him. He'd spent his adult life being compared to machines, not mothers. When the nurse finally came out, she said, "Ms. Ruiz is stable. You can see her in a few minutes." Damian looked down at Sophie, asleep now, fingers still clutching the hem of his coat. For a man who'd spent years buying his way out of feelings, it was strange how one wrong call had made the whole world feel smaller and heavier. Elena woke an hour later, disoriented but breathing normally. Damian stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The man your daughter accidentally called," he said. "I brought you here." Her brow furrowed. "You didn't have to." "She's a smart kid," he interrupted gently. "Knew her address, stayed calm. You did good with her?" Something flickered in her eyes. Suspicion, gratitude, pride, then faded into exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay." "Don't," he said. "Just rest." He turned to leave, but Sophie's voice stopped him. Wait. She'd woken up and was standing beside the bed, hair tangled, holding her rabbit. Will you come back tomorrow? Elena looked startled. Sophie? Damien hesitated. The correct answer was no. This wasn't his world. But the words that came out surprised even him. I'll bring breakfast, he said. Sophie smiled, small and sleepy. Then we'll wait for you. He walked out of the hospital into the thin dawn light, the city slowly waking around him. The drizzle had stopped, but the air still smelled like rain, like something that had broken and might finally be clean again. He didn't know it yet, but that one wrong number had just rerouted the rest of his life. When Elena Ruiz opened her eyes, the world came back in fragments. White ceilings, the hiss of oxygen, the steady beeping of a monitor keeping time with her pulse. Then the smell of antiseptic, too familiar from years of hospital shifts she no longer worked. Her first thought was Sophie. She pushed herself upright too fast, the IV tugging against her arm. Easy, said a voice from the corner. She turned, startled. A man was sitting near the window, tall, dark-suited, completely out of place in this wing of the hospital. His presence felt deliberate, composed, like a painting that didn't belong on a chipped wall. You're safe, he said. Your daughter's fine. Elena's shoulders dropped with relief. Sophie, she's here? She's asleep in the waiting room, he said. The nurses are keeping an eye on her. She blinked at him. And you are? He hesitated just long enough to make her aware of how odd this must look. Damien Ward, he said finally. You called me last night. Her brows knit in confusion. Called you? I don't understand. He smiled faintly. Your daughter called the wrong number. I'm the wrong number. For a long moment, Elena just stared, the pieces slowly falling into place. You're the one who brought me here? He nodded once. It seemed urgent. Why would you even... She stopped herself, shaking her head. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said quietly, but I could. The simplicity of the answer silenced her. By the time Sophie woke, sunlight had filled the room, and Damien had stepped outside to take a call. He stood in the hallway, his tone clipped. Cancel the investor breakfast, he said. Tell them I'm out of town. Again? His assistant's voice crackled through the earpiece. You've already rescheduled twice. Then make it 3 times. He hung up before she could argue. When he turned back, he saw Sophie standing by the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She looked up at him like someone assessing whether a dream had followed her into morning. Mom said you're Mr. Ward, she said. That's right. You're the wrong number, he chuckled. I suppose I am. Mom said wrong numbers don't call back. He knelt so he was eye level with her. Most don't. She frowned, thinking hard about that. But you did. I guess I like breaking rules, he said. And she smiled, the gap-toothed kind that could thaw stone. Later, when Elena was discharged, Damien walked them downstairs. The nurse handed her a bill that made her heart sink, until she saw the words, paid in full, stamped across the top. There's been a mistake, she said. No mistake, the nurse replied, glancing toward Damien. Elena turned to him sharply. You can't just... I didn't want it to hold up your discharge, he said. Consider it a loan. I didn't ask for charity. It's not charity, he said evenly. It's efficiency. She glared at him, but exhaustion dulled her fight. I'll repay you. I know you will, he said, and for some reason that disarmed her more than any reassurance could have. Outside, the air smelled like rain and city dust. Sophie slipped her small hand into her mother's, humming softly. Damien opened the car door for them, a gesture that felt too formal, too intimate for people who had met by accident. You really don't have to drive us, Elena said. I know, he said again. But I can, she sighed. You keep saying that like it's an answer. It usually is, he said, and that time she almost smiled. They drove in silence through the morning traffic, Boston unfolding in muted grays and silvers. Elena glanced at him occasionally, trying to place him. The suit, the car, the quiet authority, everything about him screamed wealth. Yet there was something oddly unpolished beneath it. So, she said finally, what exactly do you do, Mr. Ward? He considered the question as if trying to remember. Mostly, I build things, he said. Companies, programs. Sometimes I try to fix things I probably shouldn't. That sounds vague. It's safer that way, he said. Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. Do you build houses? Not yet, he said, smiling in the rearview mirror. But maybe I should start. Elena turned to the window, hiding a smile of her own. When they reached her apartment, she unbuckled Sophie and straightened up. Thank you, she said, her tone measured, for everything. But you don't owe us anything more. I know, he said. Still, would it be all right if I stopped by tomorrow? Just to check in? That's not necessary, she said quickly. He nodded. I'll do it anyway. Mr. Ward, he paused, one hand on the car door. Damien, he corrected. She blinked. Right, Damien. He gave a polite half smile and got back into the car. Sophie waved from the window, and he waved back before driving away. For a long time, Elena stood there, the drizzle misting her hair, wondering why a man like that had shown up at her door, and why, for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. That night, as she tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl whispered, Mom, do you think he's an angel? Elena smiled faintly. No, sweetheart. He's just a man who made a strange choice. Sophie yawned. Then I hope he makes another one. Elena sat there for a long time after Sophie fell asleep, staring at the flickering streetlight outside the window. Somewhere out there, a stranger in a black SUV had crossed paths with her life by pure accident, or something that only looked like one. And for reasons she couldn't name, she knew this wasn't over. When Damien returned the next morning, the neighborhood looked even smaller than he remembered. The rain had washed the streets clean but left everything else the same. Peeling brick, shuttered stores, an old man sweeping in front of the bodega as if his efforts could hold the city together. He carried a brown paper bag in one hand, the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting into the cold air. He hadn't slept, not really. His board would meet in 4 hours to finalize a contract worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, and he hadn't decided whether he'd show up. He climbed the narrow stairs to the red door and knocked once. The lock clicked. Sophie's voice came first. You brought breakfast. The door swung open, and she stood there barefoot, beaming, her hair sticking out in half a dozen directions. Mom said you wouldn't actually come. Elena appeared behind her, still pale but on her feet. She wore a faded gray sweater, the sleeves pushed up past her elbows, and her eyes held that particular mix of gratitude and suspicion that Damien had seen 1,000 times in boardrooms, just never from someone who actually needed help. I told her she shouldn't bet against me, Damien said lightly. Sophie giggled and took the bag from his hands. Coffee's for grown-ups, right? That depends, he said. You planning to run a company today? She grinned. Maybe. Elena sighed, rubbing her temple. Sophie, go wash your hands before breakfast. When the girl scampered off, Elena turned to him. You didn't have to come back. I said I would. That doesn't make it normal. Maybe not, he admitted. But I'm not big on normal. She crossed her arms, studying him for a beat. You don't strike me as a man who shows up twice for anything. That used to be true, he said, his tone quieter now. Elena frowned but didn't press. She motioned toward the kitchen. You might as well sit. The table's wobbly and the chairs creak, but they work. He smiled faintly. As long as they don't collapse under a billionaire's guilt, I think we'll be fine. She stopped mid-step, turning back to him. A billionaire? Damien froze for a fraction too long. Did Sophie mention my last name? No, Elena said slowly, but I've heard it before. The Westwood Medical Fund, right? You're on the news sometimes. Philanthropist, investor, occasional savior of the world. Her tone wasn't mocking, just wary. He exhaled, resigned. You forgot occasional fool. Well, she said, pulling 2 mugs from the shelf, at least you're self-aware. They ate quietly, the smell of toast filling the small apartment. Sophie hummed as she drew on a napkin with a blue crayon. Elena looked over the rim of her cup. So tell me something, Mr. Ward. Why does a man with that kind of money drive through the rain for strangers? Habit, he said. Habit? He nodded. I spend most of my life writing checks to problems. This one didn't fit in a spreadsheet. Her expression softened slightly, though her guard didn't drop completely. You talk like a man who's trying to balance something he can't count. He smiled faintly. Maybe I am. She leaned back. You could have called an ambulance and walked away. Why didn't you? He hesitated, then looked at Sophie, who was drawing the two of them beside a stick-figure house with a crooked sun. Because your daughter believed someone would come if she asked, and I didn't want her to be wrong. For a long time, Elena said nothing. Then she murmured, She's always believed in people more than she should. She might be right this time, Damien said. Later, as Elena cleared the dishes, Damien wandered toward the small bookshelf near the window. It was filled with worn paperbacks and medical journals. One binder stood out, labeled St. Marine's Reports. He recognized the hospital name instantly. The Westwood Fund had funneled millions into its expansion project 2 years earlier. Elena noticed where his eyes landed. Don't, she said quickly. He turned. You work there? I survived there. Her voice carried a bitterness that made him stop. She wiped her hands on a towel and faced him. I was a nurse. 14 years. Then one night, a child coded on a monitor that never beeped. The equipment failed. I reported it. The next week, I was written up for procedural errors. 2 months later, they let me go. Damien's jaw tightened. What happened to the manufacturer? They got a bigger contract, she said flatly. Hospitals don't fire suppliers, they fire witnesses. He looked at her carefully. You kept the records. I kept what they didn't take, she said, nodding toward the binder. It won't change anything. Nobody listens to people like me. Maybe they will, he said. Elena's eyes narrowed. Why would you care? Because I funded part of that expansion, he admitted. My name's on the plaque outside the pediatric wing. Her expression froze. Shock first, then anger. You? You helped them? I didn't know, he said quickly. They filed clean audits, perfect outcomes. It all looked legitimate. She laughed bitterly. You think paper tells the truth? No, he said softly. But people do. The room went still. Sophie's voice broke the tension from the table. Mom, can we show him my picture? Elena swallowed hard. Sure, sweetheart. Sophie held it up proudly. 3 stick figures, 2 tall, 1 small, standing under a blue sky. It's us, she said. You came back, so now you're in it. Elena looked down at the drawing, then back at Damien. Careful, she said quietly. If you keep showing up, she'll start believing in you. He met her gaze evenly. Then I guess I'd better not disappoint her. Outside, the first light of afternoon spilled through the window, catching on the crayon sun and making it glow. Neither of them noticed that Damien's phone was still vibrating in his pocket. Dozens of missed calls from a world that suddenly mattered less than the one he'd just walked into. The file of evidence felt heavier than its size justified. Damien stared at the binder on his desk, the words St. Marine's Reports scrawled in fading ink across the spine. Outside, the skyline pulsed with artificial calm, towering glass hiding every compromise he'd ever signed. He'd spent his life believing numbers told the truth. Now, in a few dozen printed pages, he saw how easily they'd been used to bury it. He picked up his phone. Jonas, he said, run a trace on St. Marine's procurement records from the last 3 years. Focus on cardiac telemetry devices. I want vendors, payment routes, and sign-offs. Jonas exhaled on the other end. You're diving into the weeds yourself? I funded the program, Damien replied. If someone poisoned it with bad contracts, I want to know where the rot started. Copy that, Jonas said. But you might not like what you find. I already don't. Later that day, he drove back to East Boston. He told himself it was to return the binder, but he knew better. Curiosity had become obligation. The city changed as he crossed the bridge, steel and glass giving way to cracked concrete and hand-painted shop signs. It was a world that didn't have the luxury of pretending everything worked. Elena opened the door before he knocked. She looked like she hadn't slept. I didn't think you'd actually take that, she said. I shouldn't have, he admitted, holding up the binder. But I did. And you were right. Those equipment failures weren't random. Her eyes narrowed. You found something? Enough to make me angry. She stepped aside to let him in. Anger's easy. Fixing it isn't. Then maybe we start with what you still have. She motioned toward the kitchen table, where a second envelope waited. These are copies of patient logs. They doctored the electronic files after I was suspended, but I kept printouts from my last shift. You'll see Connor's chart, 7 years old, cardiac arrest. The monitor flatlined 5 minutes before anyone noticed. Damien flipped through the pages, the name Connor L. highlighted in red. The times didn't match. The readouts had been rewritten. His throat tightened. Do you know who signed the equipment clearance? CFO at the time, Andrew Kalin, she said. He pushed for a new vendor called Medcore Integrated. Damien froze. Kalin works for my foundation now. Elena looked up sharply. You're telling me the man who silenced this is on your payroll? He oversees procurement for our health division. Damien's voice turned cold. And I've been trusting him with millions. He left her apartment with the envelope under his arm and a storm brewing in his chest. On the drive back, he called Jonas again. Pull everything you can on a vendor named Medcore Integrated Holdings, he said, and cross-reference with Kalin's accounts. Already did a preliminary search, Jonas said. Looks like Medcore's a shell. Same directors appear on 2 of Kalin's investment groups out of Singapore. Money goes out as equipment maintenance and comes back as consulting fees. Damien gripped the steering wheel. How long? At least 2 years, maybe more. And boss, your signatures on the approval forms. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, quietly, send me copies, all of them. When he returned to his penthouse, he found Charles Whitmore waiting in his study. The older man had been his mentor for 2 decades, part guardian, part conscience. Jonas called me, Charles said without preamble. Your opening box is best left shut. They shouldn't have been sealed in the first place, Damien replied. Charles sighed. Andrew Kalin is a snake, yes, but a useful one. He makes the uglier numbers vanish. You fire him, you'll expose the entire board. Maybe they need exposing. This isn't idealism, Damien. This is business. Hospitals run on margin. Lose that, and you lose access. You'll destroy the good you're trying to do. The good built on silence isn't worth keeping. Charles studied him. That woman, Elena Ruiz, she's gotten into your head. Damien met his gaze. She reminded me what a life looks like when we fail it. Charles's expression softened just slightly. Then tread carefully. You can't fight corruption with guilt alone. You'll need proof that holds in daylight. I'll get it, Damien said. He did not sleep. Instead, he read. Line by line, he followed the paper trail. False invoices, overlapping vendor codes, subtle language changes that turned recall request into routine inspection. He realized the fraud wasn't clever. It was confident. It relied on no one looking too closely. By dawn, he had a plan. He would push for a private audit under Westwood's name, bypassing the board, and leak the findings to federal regulators if the numbers matched what he feared. But before that, he had one more stop. He texted Elena. I need your help verifying these files. If I can prove Kalin forged internal reports, we can take him down. Are you willing? Her reply came minutes later. I lost my job for telling the truth once. I'll do it again. Damien stared at her message, feeling something shift inside him, a mix of dread and purpose. For the first time in years, his work meant something beyond wealth or reputation. He looked out over the waking city, the streets glowing in early light. Somewhere down there, a child's wrong number had become the beginning of a reckoning, and Damien Ward, a man who'd made empires out of distance, was finally ready to stand too close. Elena hadn't expected Damien to show up again so soon, but by mid-morning, his black SUV was parked outside the clinic, where she volunteered twice a week. He looked out of place among the peeling paint and fluorescent flicker, but his expression was determined, and she already knew why he'd come. You found something, she said before he even spoke. He nodded once, holding a sealed envelope. More than something. You were right about Kalin. His name's on forged clearance documents for the Medcore telemetry units. I've cross-checked the financial transfers, money looping through a consultancy in Singapore, then back into his personal trust. Elena's pulse quickened. That's embezzlement and criminal negligence. Those devices killed patients, Damien. I know. His voice dropped lower. And my foundation paid for every one of them. Her hands tightened around the clipboard she was holding. So what happens now? I'm calling a meeting with Charles and the audit team. I'll show them everything. You trust them? I used to, he said quietly. Now I just want to see who looks nervous first. By the time he reached the Westwood headquarters, The air inside the boardroom was already thick with anticipation. Damien laid out the reports across the long table, receipts, internal memos, and Elena's patient logs, all lined up like evidence in a trial. Charles was there, calm as ever, flanked by 3 executives from finance. Kalen arrived last, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his expression unreadable. "Let's get this over with," Kalen said, sliding into a chair. "You called this meeting about procurement?" Damien pressed a key on his laptop, projecting the MedCore audit onto the wall. "I'm showing you why our medical division is under investigation, whether you know it or not." Kalen's face twitched. "Investigation? By who?" "By me," Damien said. "And soon by the Justice Department, if I have anything to say about it." He clicked again. The next slide showed a network of transfers between shell accounts, complete with timestamps and approval codes. "You signed these," Damien said. 57 invoices routed through MedCore Integrated. Over $8 million in ghost maintenance. You forged FDA compliance documents. And you falsified device testing logs with a nurse's signature. The room went still. Charles's jaw tightened. "Is this true?" Kalen's mask cracked just slightly. "You can't prove I knew." Damien stepped forward. "Her name was Elena Ruiz. She lost her job because you needed someone to blame. You used her credentials to legitimize a recall report you never filed." A murmur rippled through the room. Kalen turned pale. "You think this is about one nurse? She's manipulating you, Damien. You don't understand how this industry works." "I understand perfectly," Damien said, his tone sharp as glass. "You hid behind my foundation's logo. You turned patients into numbers, and you thought I'd never notice. But I'm noticing now." Kalen's composure fractured. "You can't afford this scandal. If you drag this into court, Westwood collapses. You'll lose every donor, every contract." "Then let it fall," Damien said. Charles's voice cut through the silence. "That's enough. Damien, step outside with me." They stood in the hallway, tension vibrating between them. "Do you know what you're doing?" Charles asked. "Yes," Damien said. "For once I do." "You'll destroy your legacy." "My legacy was built on a lie." Charles exhaled, the weariness in his eyes almost paternal. "You can't fix this by martyring yourself. Let Kalen take the fall quietly. We'll restructure, distance the foundation. You walk away clean." Damien shook his head. "That's the problem. I've walked away clean from too many things that weren't." Charles's gaze hardened. "And what about her? That nurse? Are you doing this for her?" "I'm doing it because she's the only one who didn't." That night, Damien called Elena. She answered on the second ring. "I told the board," he said simply. "Kalen's cornered. He'll retaliate." "Then we're both targets," she said. There was a pause. "You're not alone in this." "Neither are you," she replied. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside her apartment window, the city lights flickered like stars refusing to die. Finally, she said, "You're risking everything for people who won't thank you." "I'm not doing it for thanks." "Then why?" He thought of Sophie's voice on the phone that first night, small, scared, full of trust. Because a little girl believed someone would answer when she called for help. When he hung up, he stared out over the harbor, the wind cold against his face. His phone buzzed again. Jonas. "Boss," Jonas said quickly, "I traced another account tied to Callan. Offshore storage. Looks like he's been shredding files all week. If we want proof, we need to move now." Damien straightened. "Then we move tonight." By midnight, the city's skyline glowed faintly under the mist. Damien watched from his office as Jonas uploaded the secured data to a federal portal, every file encrypted, every document timestamped. The system pinged once. Transfer complete. He leaned back, exhausted but strangely at peace. He had crossed the line between saving his reputation and saving what mattered. And somewhere in the quiet, he realized it wasn't guilt that kept him going anymore. It was purpose. Damien didn't sleep the night the files were sent. Every hour felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Too still, too quiet, too heavy to breathe. By dawn, the first wave hit. The Boston Herald ran a headline. Westwood Foundation under federal review. CFO named in fraud investigation. Below it, Kalen's photo stared up from the screen, smug and cornered all at once. Damien scrolled through the article without blinking, noting how his own name was mentioned, carefully, neutrally, like someone walking on glass. Founder Damien Ward declined comment. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or break something. Jonas called minutes later. "It's out," he said. "DOJ confirmed receipt of the files. They're launching a preliminary audit." "And Kalen," Damien asked, "disappeared last night. Took a private car from his condo and ditched his phone. My guess, lawyers are already spinning." Damien rubbed his eyes. "Let them spin." By mid-morning, the board had gathered in emergency session. Damien stood at the head of the long oak table. His reflection stared back at him from the glossy surface, pale and determined. Charles was the first to speak. "You could have brought this to us quietly. Now every donor wants answers." "They'll get them," Damien said evenly. "Every document I turned over is public record now." One of the executives leaned forward, his voice taut. "You went rogue, Damien. You bypassed our council, our protocols." "I bypassed corruption," Damien snapped. "You think this place was built on ethics? We built empires on other people's tragedies and called it innovation." The room fell silent. Charles folded his arms. "And what happens when you're the one they decide to crucify? You signed those procurement approvals." "I did," Damien said, "and I'll answer for that." Another voice broke in, one of the younger directors. "You're admitting guilt?" "I'm admitting blindness," he said quietly, "and I'm done pretending that's not the same thing." By afternoon, the foundation's legal department was in chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters camped outside the lobby. Damien's assistant texted hourly updates about donor withdrawals. It all blurred together, noise he couldn't care about anymore. He drove instead. No destination, just motion. The city slid past in shades of gray until he found himself near the small apartment above Jimmy's tools. Elena opened the door before he could knock. "You shouldn't be here," she said immediately. "They already know your name," he said. "The press has the documents." Her face drained of color. "You told them?" "I had to," he said. "Without your logs, they'd bury everything." She stepped back, anger and fear clashing in her eyes. "You promised anonymity." "I promised truth," he said. "And I'm sorry, Elena, but the truth needed a voice." She looked away, her voice trembling. "You think I wanted fame? I just wanted peace. My daughter—" "I'll protect her," he interrupted. "You can't protect anyone," she said sharply. "You can't even protect yourself." The words landed like a slap, but she wasn't wrong. He exhaled slowly. "You're right, but I can stand beside you while this burns." Her anger cracked, replaced by weary resignation. "You don't understand what happens to people who speak up. They lose everything." He met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time someone else did too." They sat in silence after that, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between them. Sophie's drawing was still pinned to the wall, the three stick figures beneath a blue crayon sun. Elena's eyes softened. "When I called the hospital about Connor, the boy who died, they told me it was a systems failure. You know what that means?" He shook his head. "It means no one's guilty. Machines break, charts vanish, files get rewritten. Nobody's fault, nobody's name. The child becomes data." Damien's throat tightened. "Not anymore." She studied him, as if trying to see whether she believed that. Then she said quietly, "If you keep this up, they'll come after you next." "They already are. What will you do?" "Finish it," he said. That night, Damien met Jonas in a dim parking lot by the docks. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Jonas handed him a folder thick with printouts. "These came from Kalen's backup server," Jonas said. "You were right. It's bigger than we thought. Contracts across 3 states, all with the same forged compliance numbers. He's been laundering under your name for years." Damien flipped through the files, jaw tightening. "Can we trace the transfers?" "Already sent to the feds. They'll subpoena his accounts by morning." Jonas hesitated. "You know this doesn't stop at Callan. The regulators will come for Westwood, for you." "I'm counting on it," Damien said. "It's the only way to clean house." Jonas frowned. "And what about her? Ruiz. They'll drag her through this too." "I'll make sure she's protected," Damien said. Whatever it costs. Jonas studied him for a long moment. You really care about them, don't you? The nurse? The kid? Damien didn't answer. He just stared out toward the water, where faint lights rippled across the harbor. Sometimes the wrong call is the one that finally wakes you up, he murmured. When he got home, the city was asleep. The headlines kept updating on his phone, each one louder than the last. Ward under scrutiny. Corporate hero turned whistleblower? Billionaires fall from grace or moral reckoning? He silenced the phone and stood by the window. The skyline that once symbolized victory now looked hollow, steel bones glinting under indifferent stars. For the first time, Damien Ward didn't feel like a man losing everything. He felt like a man finally starting to tell the truth. By morning, the world knew his name, not the curated one from glossy magazines or charity galas, but the real one, the man behind the fall. Billionaire Damien Ward linked to fraud investigation. The headline scrolled across every network screen in the city. Beneath it, his face looked both guilty and defiant. He shut off the television and stared at the silent apartment. It felt less like a home now, and more like a museum of everything he used to be. Sleek furniture, cold marble, art that had never once moved him. He could almost hear Charles's voice echoing in his mind. You can't fight corruption with guilt, Damien. Maybe not, but you could fight it with truth. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He answered anyway. Mr. Ward, a clipped voice said, this is Agent Whitaker with the Department of Justice. We'd like you to come in today for a statement regarding the Medcorp accounts. Damien hesitated. I'll come. Noon. The agent's tone was professional, detached. You should bring counsel. I'm not bringing anyone, Damien said and hung up. At 11:15, he stopped by the clinic where Elena was finishing her volunteer shift. The nurses whispered when they saw him, some in awe, others in judgment. She emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her scrubs, her face pale. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. You're on every screen in the building. I know, he said. I'm heading to the DOJ in an hour. She froze. To turn yourself in? To testify, he corrected. They need the full picture. The forged documents, the shell companies, everything Kalen built under my nose. Elena's voice trembled. You think they'll listen? They have to. She shook her head. No, they don't. They'll protect the people who keep the system alive. You'll take the fall, Damien. He smiled faintly, tiredly. Maybe that's the point. She looked at him for a long moment, eyes flicking between anger and fear. You can't save this city by burning yourself down. He took a breath, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. This holds every document we collected. If anything happens to me, you send it to the press directly. No intermediaries. She didn't take it. You're asking me to risk my life again. I'm asking you to finish what you started, he said gently. Her jaw tightened, but she took it. You're a fool. I've been worse. When he arrived at the Department of Justice building, the air felt electric, like the space before lightning strikes. Cameras lined the sidewalk, reporters shouting questions he didn't answer. Inside, the echo of his shoes followed him down the sterile hallway until he reached a small conference room. Agent Whitaker sat across from him, flanked by two other officials. Mr. Ward, she said, thank you for coming voluntarily. Let's skip the preamble, Damien replied. You want to know how deep it goes. He slid a folder across the table. Copies of everything Jonas had gathered. Bank records, emails, authorization chains. That's your roadmap. You'll find proof of offshore transfers, asset laundering, and falsified compliance reports tied to Andrew Kalen and his subsidiaries. Whitaker flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. You're aware that your signature appears on several of these documents? I am. And you're prepared to testify that you were unaware of their content at the time of signing. I was willfully blind, he said simply. I trusted a system designed to hide its own crimes. That's not innocence. That's neglect. I'll take responsibility for that. The room fell quiet. The other agents exchanged glances. Whitaker leaned back. Mr. Ward, are you aware that your whistleblower protection expires the moment intent is established? I'm not here for protection, he said. I'm here for truth. She studied him. And what do you expect to gain from this? He looked at her evenly. Nothing I can keep. When the questioning ended, he walked out into the crisp autumn light. The reporters swarmed again, shouting questions, flashes blinding him. "Mr. Ward, did you know about the fraud? Are you cooperating with prosecutors? Is the nurse involved?" That last one made him stop. He turned toward the sea of microphones. "Leave her out of this," he said. His voice carried, steady, cutting. "She told the truth before any of you did. That makes her a hero, not a suspect." The crowd erupted, cameras snapping, but he didn't look back. That evening, Elena watched the clip on a small television at home. Sophie sat beside her, eating cereal out of the box. "He's not bad," Sophie said around a mouthful. Elena smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. He's not bad. He's just brave in the wrong way." Sophie tilted her head. "Maybe brave doesn't have a wrong way." Elena didn't answer. She stared at the screen, at Damien's image frozen mid-sentence, defiant under flashing lights. Something inside her softened, though she wished it wouldn't. She glanced at the USB drive sitting on the counter, its silver casing glinting beneath the kitchen light. It was proof and burden, hope and danger all at once. "Mom?" Sophie asked. "If the bad people lose, what happens next?" Elena reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Then good people have to decide what to do with the world that's left." Across town, Damien sat in his darkened penthouse, the skyline glowing in silence. His phone buzzed once, a text from Jonas. "Kaylin's lawyers are folding. Federal agents are moving in tonight." "You did it." He stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down. Through the glass, he could see the city stretching endlessly, unforgiven, unhealed, but maybe just a little more honest. And for the first time in his life, Damien Ward felt something like peace, not because he'd saved anyone, but because he'd finally stopped running from himself. The grand jury hearing felt less like justice and more like exposure. The fluorescent lights in the courtroom buzzed faintly, cutting through the air thick with quiet tension. Damien sat at the witness table, a man who once commanded boardrooms now reduced to an ordinary voice under oath. "Mr. Ward," the lead prosecutor began, flipping open a file thick with evidence. "You claim that your CFO, Andrew Kaylin, acted independently in authorizing the defective equipment purchases. Is that correct?" Damien met the man's gaze. "Not independently," he said. "He acted under a system I helped build, a system that rewarded efficiency over scrutiny. I gave him room to move, and he used it to cover his tracks. That's on me too." The room shifted. Reporters scribbled, pens tapping furiously. The prosecutor arched a brow. "So you're admitting negligence?" "I'm admitting I stopped asking questions when the answers were inconvenient." The quiet that followed wasn't judgmental. It was surprised. Few men in Damien's position had ever said those words aloud. The prosecutor leaned forward. "And what made you start asking again?" He thought of Sophie's trembling voice, of Elena standing by her kitchen window, her strength disguised as weariness. "A phone call," he said simply. When it was over, the corridor outside the courtroom felt like another world. Muted, strange, unreal. Charles was waiting near the exit, his expression unreadable. "You did well," Charles said, walking beside him. "Too well, maybe. The press will love you for it." "I didn't do it for them," Damien replied. "I know," Charles said. "That's what makes it dangerous." They stepped out into the cold daylight, cameras flashing from across the street. Damien didn't stop for questions. He didn't need to explain himself anymore. But as he reached his car, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Ward." "Funny hearing you sound human, Damien." The voice was oily, practiced. "Callan." Damien exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't be calling me." "I'm calling because you don't understand what you've started," Callan said. "The feds won't stop at me. They'll dig through every fund, every donation. You'll lose everything you built." "I already lost it," Damien said. "I just didn't know it yet." Callan laughed softly. "Still playing martyr, I see. Tell your nurse friend to watch herself. She thinks truth is armor, but I've seen armor shatter." The line went dead. Damien stood still, the phone heavy in his hand. The city's noise seemed to dim around him. leaving only that single threat echoing in his mind. Elena found out the same night, through a knock on her door, not from the press or the agents, but from a courier. A plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Her and Sophie walking home from school, taken from across the street. Her pulse spiked. She turned the photo over. Nothing written, just the silent message of power. "We see you." She didn't call Damien right away. Instead, she checked the locks twice, made Sophie's dinner, read her a bedtime story, and waited until her daughter was asleep. Only then did she text him, "He's watching us." Damien didn't reply with words. 10 minutes later, headlights glowed outside her window. When she opened the door, he was already on the steps. "You should have called sooner," he said, voice low. "I didn't want to scare Sophie." "She doesn't need to know," he said, stepping past her and scanning the small apartment automatically. The corners, the windows, the shadows. "You'll stay at a hotel tonight." "I'm not running." "It's not running," he said. "It's staying alive." She crossed her arms. "He's bluffing." Damien turned, meeting her eyes. Men like Kalen don't bluff. They warn once. Their silence stretched, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint drip of a leaking faucet. Finally, she said, "You can't protect me from everything." "No," he said, "but I can try to make sure you don't pay for my choices." "You didn't make this mess alone." "Doesn't matter," he said. "The world doesn't punish everyone equally. It'll come for you first." For a long moment, neither moved. Then she said quietly, "Sophie's safe with my neighbor tonight. I'll pack a bag." He nodded. They drove in silence through the sleeping city, streetlights carving slow amber streaks across the windshield. Damien glanced at her once, but she was staring out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "When this ends," she said suddenly, "what happens to you?" He hesitated. "If I'm lucky, I'll testify, sign over the fund, and fade out quietly. And if you're not lucky," he smiled faintly, "then I'll find out whether redemption still counts when nobody's watching." Elena turned toward him. "You already did enough." "Not yet," he said. "Kalen's not finished. He'll try to cut a deal. He'll trade your name for immunity if he can." Her throat tightened. "Then you stop him." "I will." They reached the hotel near the harbor. Damien walked her to the lobby, past the glass doors that reflected them side by side. Two people who shouldn't have ever crossed paths but did, and changed everything. At the elevator, Elena paused. "Thank you." He looked at her, the words too small for what they'd endured. "You don't have to thank me." "I'm not," she said softly. "I'm saying goodbye in case this is the last time we get to say it." He wanted to tell her it wasn't, that he'd keep her safe no matter what. But lies felt like betrayal now, even when they came from hope. So he only said, "Good night, Elena." She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed slowly, and for the first time, Damien Ward realized how terrifying it felt to care about someone who wasn't replaceable. Outside, his phone buzzed again. A text from Jonas. Kalen's lawyers requested a private meeting. He's ready to make a deal. Damien typed back, "Tell them I'll be there." Then he slipped his hands into his coat pockets, walked out into the cold harbor air, and whispered to no one, "If this ends tonight, let it end clean." The meeting with Kalen's lawyers took place in a downtown skyscraper where the air smelled like old secrets and new money. Damien sat across from them, hands folded, calm only on the surface. The lawyer, sharp suit, perfect diction, snake eyes, smiled as if the entire world was a negotiation. "Mr. Ward," he began smoothly, "our client is willing to cooperate. In exchange for full immunity, of course. He'll turn over documentation that implicates others at Westwood, the board perhaps, maybe even your mentor, Charles Whitmore." Damien didn't blink. "What does he have to offer that I haven't already given the Department of Justice?" The lawyer tilted his head. "Names, dates, signatures, things that could make this much larger than you think." "And what does he want?" "Freedom," the lawyer said simply, "and for you to retract your testimony regarding the forged documents." Damien leaned back, letting the silence stretch. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. "Tell Kalen he's negotiating from a burning building." The lawyer's smile didn't falter. "Careful, Mr. Ward. He's not the only one who can make a call." Damien stood. Neither am I. He left before the lawyer could respond, the door closing behind him like a full stop at the end of a sentence he no longer needed to read. By the time he reached his car, Jonas had already texted. Jonas, you were right. Kalen's running scared. His lawyer just reached out to the DOJ again, offering full disclosure in exchange for witness protection. Damian, he's bluffing. Jonas, then why did the DOJ pause your next deposition? They're listening to him. Damien stared at the message, the cold realization settling in. If Kalen flipped first, he could twist everything, frame Damien as complicit, rewrite the truth. He started the engine, tires screeching against wet pavement as he headed for the one place Kalen couldn't spin the story, his private office at Westwood headquarters. It was after midnight when Damien reached the building. The security guard gave him a wary nod but didn't stop him. Everyone had seen the headlines. Everyone knew the empire was collapsing. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as he walked to Kalen's office. The door was unlocked. Inside, half the drawers were open, the desk stripped bare except for a single envelope. Damien tore it open. Inside was a printed email chain between Kalen and Charles. Dates, amounts, approvals. Charles's name appeared again and again. The mentor who had taught him everything had been part of it all along. His chest tightened. For years, Charles had been his compass, his measure of reason. And now, just another fraud in a suit. Should have seen it coming, Damien whispered to himself. He took photos of every page, sent them to Jonas, then called Elena. She answered on the second ring, voice shaky with sleep. Damien, it's past 1. I found something, he said. Charles, he's in it too. A pause. Are you sure? I have the proof. Emails, transfers. He was protecting Kalen and himself. Elena's voice softened. So what happens now? I go back tomorrow. I testify again. No deals, no lawyers, just truth. She was silent for a long moment. You'll lose everything. I already did. Her breath caught, and when she finally spoke, it was quiet. Don't let this break you, Damien. Don't let them take what's left of you. I won't, he said, though part of him wasn't sure. Stay with Sophie tomorrow. Don't go out until you hear from me. I will. Promise me. I promise. He arrived at the DOJ building before sunrise. The sky was gray, heavy, the kind that never fully brightens. Agent Whitaker met him in the hallway, her expression grave. Mr. Ward, she said, we've received new information from Mr. Kalen's counsel. I'm aware, Damien said. It's a lie. She studied him for a moment. He claims Charles Whitmore authorized the fund transfers and that you covered for him until recently. Damien smiled bitterly. He's half right. Her brows lifted. Meaning? Meaning I didn't see it soon enough, but I will now. He handed her his phone, showing her the photos. These are from Kalen's office. Proof that Charles was part of the operation. I want it entered into evidence. Whitaker took the phone, flipping through the images. For a moment, she looked almost impressed. You realize this could take the entire foundation down? It should, he said. If it was built on this. She nodded once. We'll proceed. You'll be called back to the stand tomorrow. When Damien stepped outside, the air felt thinner. The city stretched below him, broken, bruised, but still moving. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like its architect. He felt like its witness. He texted Elena one word. Safe. Then another to Jonas. Send everything to the press after tomorrow's session, no matter what happens. Jonas replied immediately. You sure about this? Damien smiled faintly. Completely. That night he drove to the harbor again, the same spot where Sophie had once waved at the ferries and called him the man who answered the wrong call. Now he understood what that meant. He'd spent his life answering the right ones, the ones that kept him powerful, admired, untouchable. But it was the wrong one that finally made him human. The water shimmered under the dim lights, quiet, endless. Tomorrow he would testify one last time. Then whatever was left, his company, his fortune, his name, would belong to the truth. And for Damien Ward, that was finally enough. Kalen's lawyers expected an audience. Damien gave them silence instead. The meeting took place in a private conference suite on the 31st floor of a neutral law office downtown. There were no cameras, no reporters, just glass walls, muted light, and tension that hummed like static. Kalen was already there when Damien walked in, sitting behind the table as if it still belonged to him. The man's suit was immaculate, but his face had thinned, the edges worn down by weeks of scrutiny. "Well," Kalen said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, "the prodigal philanthropist himself. Come to make peace?" Damien took the seat opposite him. "You asked for this meeting. Talk." The lawyer beside Kalen cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, my client is prepared to offer full cooperation with investigators in exchange for immunity. He's willing to name other parties involved in the procurement scandal. Vendors, board members, subcontractors. That could protect your foundation's assets." Damien didn't blink. "And in exchange, public exoneration," Kalen said smoothly. "A joint statement. We both acknowledge systemic failures without assigning individual blame. You get to keep your reputation intact. I get to keep my freedom." Damien leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. "You forged a nurse's name on a compliance document that let a child die. You made my money a weapon. And you think I'll protect you from consequence?" Kalen's smile wavered. "Don't pretend you're innocent. You built this empire on shortcuts and plausible deniability. I just followed your lead." Damien's voice lowered. "You don't get to hide behind my guilt," the lawyer interjected quickly. "Mr. Ward, if this goes to trial, both of you risk indictment. The jury won't care who's more guilty. They'll see two men, rich and arrogant, fighting over blame while a boy's name is buried under red tape." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Damien stood slowly. "You're right about one thing. They'll see two men, but only one of us still remembers that boy's name." He turned to leave, but Kalen's voice followed him, cold and furious. "You think this will end with a confession? You'll lose everything. The fund, your companies, your so-called redemption story. When I fall, I'll take you down with me." Damien didn't look back. "You already did." By the next morning, Kalen's deal had collapsed. Jonas confirmed it first, forwarding a message from the federal office. Negotiations terminated. Defendant withdrew cooperation. Damien stared at the email for a long time, then closed his laptop. He'd expected as much. Kalen would rather burn than bend. A knock came at his office door. It was Charles. He looked older than usual, the lines around his eyes deeper. "They're saying Kalen's preparing to flee. Offshore accounts resurfacing, private jet on standby. They'll move to detain him by tonight." Damien nodded. "Let them." Charles hesitated. "And you? Once he's gone, the board will turn on you. They'll need another name to blame." "I know." "You could walk away quietly," Charles said. "Start over somewhere else. No one would stop you." Damien looked out at the skyline, the same skyline he'd built half of. "That's exactly why I won't." Elena didn't hear about Kalen's attempted escape until the news broke that evening. CFO arrested at Logan Airport amid corruption scandal. The photo showed him in handcuffs, head lowered, surrounded by flashing lights. The headlines called it closure. It didn't feel like that to her. She called Damien. He answered on the second ring. "It's over," she said quietly. "Almost," he replied. "You sound disappointed." "No," he said after a moment. "Just tired." "I don't think there's a word for what we are," she said. "Tired isn't big enough." He smiled faintly at her honesty. "You're probably right." There was a pause, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Elena asked, "What happens to the foundation?" "I'm dissolving it," Damien said. "Half the assets will go into a medical relief trust under independent oversight. The rest will cover restitution claims for the families. And you? I'll testify again, then disappear." She exhaled. "You think disappearing is redemption?" "No," he said, "but maybe it's mercy." 3 weeks later, the final hearing took place. The courtroom was smaller this time, emptier. Damien testified one last time, not as a billionaire or a benefactor, but as a man finally willing to stand in his own shadow. When it ended, the judge's gavel came down softly, as if even justice felt weary. Outside, reporters called his name. He ignored them, walking through the drizzle toward the waiting car. But halfway there, He saw Elena and Sophie standing by the steps, an umbrella between them. Sophie waved. "You did it!" He smiled. Something quiet, something real. "We did." Elena stepped closer. "They'll write stories about you now. Then maybe they'll finally write about the people who deserve them more." He nodded toward her. "About you." She shook her head.